So I get reached out quite often by bands and artists looking for, a music review or something along those lines. And very rarely does it happen where, as I'm diving into a particular album, the band actually reaches out to me at that point and says, hey, do you want to review our music? And I was like, well, I'm already halfway there, so let's do this. So yeah, if you want to reach out, if you have your own music, I will take a listen and maybe I'll feature it on a quarter notes or whatnot. But man, every once in a while, you get that diamond in the rough. You get that really special album. And, well, let's talk about it. Thank You from the Future by Moon Letters. So Moon Letters is a relatively new outfit from Seattle. They released their debut album in 2019 of Until They Feel the Sun. And I gotta be perfectly honest with you, I haven't actually listened to that one yet. So, I don't know how this one compares to their debut album. They're a little bit of a conglomeration of artists. We have John Alday, I think that's how you pronounce it, from Chaos and Cosmos, Mike Murphy from Cantrip, Michael Truse from Autumn Electric, Dave Webb from Wawa, Exit Wounds, and Spacebag, and finally Kelly Mays, from Panther Attack and Bone Cave Ballet. So all these guys come with a background of music from them. And I mean, half of them, I'm not quite sure if those are real bands or if they're just fun things to say. They predominantly are a more retro prog style of music. We're looking at bands like Southern Empire or Caligonaut from last year, like they're Magnified from Giants or Magnified Two Giants or something along those lines, or even say Evership. That style of retro prog, it's not quite strictly looking at the 70s and just basically reinterpreting and representing them. There's a little bit more of a modern spin to it. There's a little bit more aggression, a little bit more energy to it, not to the full extent of being like metal or anything like that, but just kind of like really putting the rock back into the progressive rock. Not necessarily, floundering with symphonic styles of that, because I feel like a lot of bands that do the retro prog predominantly lean on the symphonic side of things. These guys lean much more on the rock side of things. And pretty much right from the beginning of this album, I was hooked. Like the first two tracks, The Sudden Sun and the Horsey, I think it is Horosi. These two tracks open up for about 10 minutes worth of really good music in terms of letting the audience know what we're getting. As I mentioned, it's very fast paced, very big in sound, but never really floundering too much within the symphonic sound of the whole progressive rock side of things. But what it does is, as I mentioned, it opens up and gives us a really good example of what we're going to expect. Like it goes from passage to passage to passage relatively quickly. If you're not sitting down and paying attention, you won't even realize that you're in the same song. Sometimes you'll think, are we like 3 or 4 songs away? And I also love the blending of the keyboards with the guitars, where they don't just sound exactly the same. Like I love the different sounds that the keyboards are bringing on. Sometimes it's a much more kind of like retro sound of the keyboards. Sometimes it's more of like the mid-90s Yamaha style of the keyboards. And sometimes it's just like straight up piano work. The big thing that really sets these guys apart and kind of solidifies themselves in the same camp that, say, Southern Empire or Evership or even Caligonauts had is their use of harmonizations within their vocal works. And I'm not quite sure if the vocals are being done by one person that's being overdubbed several times, or if it really is half the band singing all at the same time. You don't have quite the same amount of dripping harmonizations that you would get with bands like Spock's Beard or even Moon Safari, but you would get a lot of really juicy and really fun harmonizations within the lead singing that's going on. Like very rarely do you have just like a single voice at any one time. But for me, the album really gets going when we get to the third track of Mother River. And this track really, even though it's one of the shorter tracks at 4.5 minutes, they could have split this track into maybe 3 or 4 and really dive into some of the ideas that they're putting down. Like it's so interesting that they're going from one passage to another passage to another passage in this rapid fire succession that really they could have taken one of those items that they only really play with for maybe about 30 seconds and developed a whole song around it. But instead, much like the actual concept of Mother River, it's always moving, it's always changing, there's always new things being presented and new things being tried. And because of that, it makes for a very interesting listen, like something that, say, like Mars Volta would be doing, with just throwing things at the wall and seeing whatever sticks. But also, like, each one lands pretty well. And this leads us into the fourth track, the mid track of Isolation and Foreboding, where the first half of the track kind of follows suit with Mother River. It's very fast paced, it's very bombastic. You go from one passage to another passage to another passage. I love how really quick and jazzy it feels at times. Like I'm getting flavors of like a Haken Cockroach King in that sense. But right at the midpoint of this track, it really slows down and really hunkers root, and it just allows itself to build from that, and they provide this tether into the foundation of the track to allow the track to bloom forth and provide a really beautiful landscape of the surrounding area. And the musicianship that's found on this, both with the keyboards and the guitars, really does need to be applauded. I'm loving how they're able to trade back and forth between these really well-produced keyboards and the soundscapes that they're able to capture with that, paired with a very beautiful and haunting guitar. And haunting is kind of a key word here. Paired again with this, like kind of like the three of a perfect pair, the very haunting vocals that are found on this track at this point as well. Because of the harmonizations and because of the presentation that we have on there, it provides almost like this haunted house kind of feeling within it, even though the music is a lot more, I guess, upbeat than we've had with previous tracks. But then we come to my favorite track off the album, which is Child of Tomorrow, and I love, right from the beginning, we have this very fun kind of electric guitar with just a little bit of distortion on it that basically plants the root of this track right then and there to allow everything to build up. And the thing that I love about this track is how they build up to the chorus and how fun and moving this chorus is. Again, I'm getting a lot of flavors of some of the best retro prog that we've had within the past 3 or 4 years. And even though this track kind of, shies away from how how going from one passage to another passage to another passage in that rapid succession, it takes a little bit of a back seat to allow them to really develop and produce a much more fully fleshed out track. They aren't afraid to continue that MO within, the little transitional periods within this track. Then we move into the sixth track, second last track of Fate of the Alicorn, and we're getting that same kind of flavor that Child of Tomorrow has, but a little bit darker. The guitars are a little bit more in the negative, we've got a lot more of a minor key in that sense, and I love, once again, because this is the longest track off the album, they're allowing themselves to build things up. They're not going from one point to another point to another point. They're really allowing themselves to just stay in the one area and just breathe, just kind of look around. And that really is some of the best music that this band has to offer. Really love how this song really does kind of handle a lot of the more darker, meatier moments with some of the more lighter, airy moments. And it's that kind of dichotomy that we have on this track that I really enjoy. And then the album ends with Yesterday Is Gone. And man, these last 3 tracks, starting from The Child of Tomorrow, really does knock it home. We get something very, very special on this. And Yesterday Is Gone continues with that. And I love how, much like the 2 tracks that precede it, we go from this very haunting, very beautiful moments into some very intense and very chaotic elements as well. Like around the 3-minute mark, we have this really bombastic drum beat that kind of roots the track that then allows the players to make a lot of chaotic music and sounds that everything's kind of warping around. And then it finally resolves itself into a very beautiful play out by the end. So yeah, in the end, this album really did blow me away. I think this is probably the best that we've had from retro prog all year. And that really is saying something, as we've had some really standout retro prog being released. Like, this can stand toe to toe with some of the masters of the retro prog that we've had. Like, I would put this very easily beside bands and tracks that we've gotten from Spock's Beard, that we've gotten from The Tangent, that we've even gotten from like the Flower Kings and like Neil Morse. Like, this deserves to be on that same kind of pedestal, on that same kind of discussion board as a lot of those fan favorites have. I think we have a really good up-and-coming prog within Moonletters, and I'm excited to see what they've got next. So yeah, in the end, Thank You From the Future was an absolute delight. It's one that I've been listening to quite heavily within the last rotation, and when originally I listened to it, I'm like, oh, this will just be a quarter notes. The more I listened to it, the more I got out of it, and I found that this kept rewarding me every time that I came back to it. So I had to give it a full-length album review, and I'm glad that I did, because it allowed me to really dive in and digest a lot of the music that was hiding itself because of how dense this album can be. So yeah, for my final rating, I have to say that Thank You From the Future really is an album that I love with my whole heart. So there you go. I highly recommend this album. It gets the note seal of approval. Please do yourself a favor and go and listen to it. It's one of those run, don't walk to listen to this. You'll be doing yourself a favor by listening to this. And this is a kind of an album where I can recommend it to practically everybody. It's not so bombastic that I could be like, well, only if you like a lot of those like more jazzy or more complex or more challenging musics. But at the same time, it has enough of a challenge and it has enough of a complex flavor in it that if you love that kind of stuff, there's going to be something that will whet your appetite on this one. So yeah, this one gets the note seal of approval. It's a fantastic album, and it will very easily be within my top 10 albums of this year. There you go. So I should say thank you from the future from Moonletters. What did you guys think about this album? Did you have a listen to it? Please do. Please have a listen to it and let me know of your own thoughts, if you loved it, if you hated it, by commenting down below. And that's all I've got for you guys today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.